Thank you, and good afternoon. This is actually my very first time to Finland, but I have two connections to the Nordic region. One of them is that the goalie for the Boston Bruins is from here, Tuukka Rask, so you probably know who he is. And I got to meet him at Lake Winnipesaukee this summer. I have a picture that I took, and I can show it actually at the end. And also, my very first startup as an entrepreneur was a Swedish bioinformatics company right out of business school. It was a company that was in bioinformatics field, and it became a very successful company. It was actually acquired. I was the third employee of that company. And at the time, the company had 3 employees and about $200,000, and eventually got sold and had a very successful exit. So with that introduction, my goal today is to talk to you about the 5 A's of how to build an innovation ecosystem. And fortunately for me, I've had a lot of experience in this, myself and the teams that I've been on and the teams that I've led. And what I hope to share with you is to be inspirational, because I think from what I can see both here, and I've spent time in the other parts of the Nordic, I've been spending a lot of time in the Mediterranean part of Europe, particularly in Portugal, and also recently in Mexico and West Africa. So in all those countries that we serve, we take the core competencies of those countries, and we transform it into a functioning ecosystem. And actually, based on what I see here today, I was in Turku yesterday, I do believe that you have the kernel and the basis to do something very significant, and I hope after this talk you'll agree with me. So the 5 A's, and I'll put them there. So I think the first thing you have to do is analyze your ecosystem and have a vision of who you want to be. So you first have to diagnose where you are today and who's your inspirational country. And we saw some great examples earlier, such as Israel being a startup nation, and there's many examples of who you can be. That's very significant and important. The second one is ascertaining your core competence. In every ecosystem, there's something you do extremely well and very different from the rest of the world. I've spent little time here, and I can tell you that anything related to healthcare, IT, anything to do with a legacy that has mobile technology based on the Nokia alumni here, you have something special in that whole intersection of health IT as it relates to telemedicine. That's one area, and you have many others. And then the ecosystem has to function because each key player has very different incentives to participate. And one of the things that we always look at is how is each player incentivized? And the key 3 actors I'm going to talk about mostly will be university institutions, industry, and investors. They all care about different things. Investors care about liquidity. If they get in, they have to get out. Universities will care about research and translation and prototyping. And industry care about pipeline, particularly in the healthcare industry. They're looking at pipeline. In this particular setting, looking for better communications and direct-to-consumer marketing, something they're very novel at, something they're not used to, and in many countries, something that's really prohibited or even difficult because of the nature of laws. In the United States, for example, HIPAA laws. Experience is important. You cannot substitute for experience. And I'm a big fan to saying experiences that not only come from people who have done startups. Large corporations, some of them you've seen here today, Samsung, Philips, many healthcare organizations are very entrepreneurial in nature. In my particular career, I started at Johnson & Johnson, and I can't tell you that that company is as entrepreneurial today as it was then, as any startup that it is today. So I know that big corporations have very experienced people, so experienced people have to be in the ecosystem to help mentor, to help advise. It's a very critical component. And finally, there's a notion of advocacy and public policy. I actually met this group when they came as part of a roadshow in Boston, and it was part of a public policy mission. So trade missions, the rest of the world has to know what you're good at. You have to promote it. You have to promote it here locally. You have to talk to the leading actors here, the leading people in government, people in public policy, to create policies that make things like this work, that makes programs such as vertical sustainable for the long term. And also, you have to have that publicity and promotional image throughout the world and the nations that you're trying to collaborate with. So let me first just go quickly into LB Ventures, what we do. We actually just have a simple formula, management consulting in one piece. We have a particular competence in doing what we call private accelerators and accelerators that actually leverage international accelerators and give them an ecosystem immersion in the United States, particularly in Boston. We do some work in Silicon Valley as well, and there's other ecosystems such as New York that we lightly touch. And on a second piece, we tend to work with venture capital funds, particularly in emerging countries who are doing it for the first time, and take what's called a classic venture partner role, where we work with a subset of portfolio companies that we think has global potential. And in that particular instance, we take them to realize their global potential in many different interventions. And those interventions can include from getting additional equity for the companies, getting additional non-dilutive financing, to putting a non-executive chairman or non-executive directors on the board, and so forth. And so if I'll give you an example, so this is a program called K-Teams that's run in Cambridge. It was incubated at MIT. We have had it for about 4 years now in 10 countries. What we typically do is work with international startups. It could come from programs such as this one, and then they want to go ahead and elevate their visibility in a global scale. And typically we look at this ecosystem, particularly strong in life sciences and health IT as well as medtech. And you can see over the years, that we've had a significant amount of growth and traction in terms of the countries that we serve. We started out really just working with Portugal because that was the anchor client. But over the years now, we have now worked with about 8 different countries. And this year, we think we'll probably double that. We work particularly in the UK, Italy. We also have work in Eastern Europe, particularly in Hungary and Bulgaria. And also have done some work in Latin America. And this is a program that's available, it's active, it's got a website, so you're welcome to take a look at it and see if some startups you're working at could benefit from this. We'd love to have you in Boston. This is sort of my background, so for good or for bad, I've been in this for a long time. Started out my career in corporate venturing, I got into university venturing both as a student, as an alumni at MIT. That's the 2 companies I was involved with as a startup. I can't get this pointer to work. Is this? There you go. For whatever reason, it's not. It doesn't? Okay. Sorry about that. So where you see Spotfire and Software City, those 2 startups I was involved with early on. Both of them were successful. I have one that wasn't quite so successful. There was no room on the slides for it, so I didn't put it there. And so just to take it to the present, this is some of the client work now. So you can see in the corporate and VC angel-backed, ranging from a Japan initiative oncology, always to local robotics technologies in Cambridge. The university side, as I mentioned, is a large-scale program headed by MIT Portugal that we served as program managers for. And an international venture capital, 2 areas, Portugal Ventures, which is an $800 million fund out of Portugal, and Beaumont Capital, which is a $600 million family office out of Mexico City. And then a lot of work with the United States government, particularly with the SBIR program, which is called the Small Business Innovation Research. It's a $2.3 billion program that creates a lot of companies. So we try to get perspectives from the government side, international universities, and corporate. So at any angle that innovation comes from, we're ready to work with you and make you successful. So let me just talk about the pillar of this presentation, which is probably the flagship program that I was involved with was this $1 billion initiative out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to drive life sciences. And the way it was designed is that in any ecosystem, there's always interventions that are necessary for what I would call imperfections or market acceleration. In this particular case, it was designed as a 10-year, $1 billion initiative looking at 3 different programs. One of them was around infrastructure. So for example, we've created a shared experimental infrastructure for biotech startups, a company called Lab Central. We were the first investors in a major accelerator program, which is now the largest accelerator in the world, which is called Mass Challenge. And we also have involved with over 1.5 million square feet of development in this particular area. And the tax incentive side, it's really, so this was clever. We went to the Department of Revenue, and we told them is that startups don't make profits, so they can't pay taxes, but they generate jobs and they pay payroll taxes. So we created 9 different tax codes in a state tax code to enable young companies to get credits based on paying payroll taxes, not so much paying on income taxes, which was pretty clever. So it's 9 different codes that were created for that, and also extended the period of years that companies were on long life cycle development up to 15 years can carry their losses into a tax credit as well. And then finally, on the small business side, a lot of that was involved with helping young companies through what you all know as the value of death. A lot of it was really designed around that. So how do you go about doing innovation analysis? So first thing you have to do is taking a look at the sites of innovation that you want to model or look at. So when we looked at Kendall Square at the time, we did compare ourselves to Palo Alto, Berkeley, California, San Francisco, and I wish the pointer had worked so I could point to it, but what's interesting is you have to look at the concentration of firms in terms, if you add the number of IT firms plus the number of science firms, and you look at the distinguished pedigrees that your academic medical centers have in your institutions, particularly your faculty, your professors, your scientists, you start to get a raw score, and this was developed by Boston Consulting Group. And you can see that if you look at innovation strength on the far right, it's no secret that some of these hubs are very successful. You can see that Kendall Square ranks pretty high, and what makes it special is the density. So it's equal, probably a little bit behind Silicon Valley in terms of pure prowess, but on a per capita basis, it performs pretty well. So let me just give you an analysis of how we did it in Portugal. The way we looked at it, we recognized right away that Portugal is right in the middle of the European countries in terms of the key conditions, resources, processes, and results required for innovation success and venture capital. So we have an entire program around that. I won't go into the detail, but that's the very first thing we did was take a snapshot. We did the same thing in Mexico. We compared Mexico against its leading peers, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Peru. Across the left, what you'll see, the dark circles, the filled circles is what's important. So if it's dark, it's filled, it's great. And you can see what high potential here, if you look at the very last one on the left, which is private equity penetration, you can see that Mexico is tremendously underperforming the rest of its peer countries in terms of private equity, which spells opportunity. And that's why we're there. So we launched a venture capital academy that is taught in the entire country. It's been taught 3 times, Mexico City, also on Culiacan, and also Monterrey. And the idea that education around this instrument of investment will actually elevate the entrepreneurs in the system to develop companies that are venture capital eligible. So we talked about the analysis. The next is ascertaining your core competence. I think really here, I'm just going to go quickly, it's a classic marketing analysis. You look at your 4 Ps and 3 Cs. What are your strengths? You know, who's your customer, what's your core competence, who's your competition, and then you look at all the factors about, you know, the distribution of the image, you know, what kind of cost structure exists in the ecosystem for space, for entrepreneurship, and et cetera. So all these are important, and I mentioned advocacy and best practices. And the other thing is I really think is important, you have to ask yourself, who's your customer? Who is it that you're trying to serve? And one of the things that we did really well in Massachusetts, we knew that we were behind the scenes and re-engineering the way the pharmaceutical industry looked at the future. So if you looked at the pharmaceutical industry, the trends that are transforming it, a lot of that has to do with spiraling R&D costs. You know, if you look at proliferation and distribution of healthcare outcomes, a lot of that has to do with big data and consumer health. If you look at the demand for safety and post-marketing surveillance, that has to do with reimbursement and economics. So under that context, we know what that meant is that the R&D risk profile for pharmaceutical companies are going to shift to really supporting validation so they can get a lot more companies and products in the phase 2B area. And so if you were successful in doing that, what would happen is that you would create an ecosystem that the industry would be interested in being in. And that's exactly what we did. We created a lot of intellectual property programs that universities could innovate so that the federal government, such as National Institutes of Health, could fund. And that created intellectual property, creates patents, and that creates product, that creates pipeline, it attracts industry. So to talk about the next part is attracting ecosystem. So this is what it looks like now, today. Fast forward, when we entered the program, this is like in 1999, I believe it was, 98. We were not considered the #1 life sciences ecosystem. As a matter of fact, out of the top 15 pharma, only 3 were present. Today, all 15 are there. If you look at the med tech industry, again, all the companies are there today. They were not there then. So this has a little bit to do with it. So if you look at what happened moving forward, the Milken Institute, Jones Lang LaSalle, and Richards Barry Joyce, all of them have recognized it now as the #1 life science ecosystem. And it has, of course, a world-class medical institution. So what's more important is what's behind this. How did this happen? And that's what I want to show you. Not so much, I want to show you the result, but how did this happen? Well, first, there's a density of colleges and universities. There's 74 colleges and universities in that area. So those colleges and universities pump a tremendous amount of money into R&D and create a tremendous amount of intellectual property. So about $1.5 billion in R&D, 264 patents. And then if you look at some of the institutions that are there, so MIT is one of them. MIT, there was a study that was done that said if MIT's inventions and companies created became a single country in terms of GDP, how would it rank? It ranked number 11th in the world behind Italy. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation. This is driven by the ecosystem there, and the university has so many programs for creating companies. And some of the companies you recognize here, such as Bose, iRobot, Raytheon, Dropbox, all were created there. And some of the things that are important in terms of mentioning is that there's a lot of effort in online learning. The school itself has a tremendous amount of faculty prowess in terms of Nobel Prize winners and who are current faculty members. And you also can see it's a tremendously international school. So all this, the Kaufman study showed that MIT graduates have founded 25,800 active companies, which employ 3.3 million people, annual sales of $2 trillion, and like I mentioned, 11th largest economy in the world. So it's important, whenever you have a great university, those metrics don't have to match. They just have to do what they need to do, which is education of the best talented minds and prolific research. So this is the magic behind all of this. This is the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And again, I apologize for the pointer not working, but what to pay attention again is the dark circles and the stars. There's a tremendous amount of intervention within the university that occurs to help this innovation happen. So on the far left, technology licensing is important. So there's a whole technology licensing process. If you look to over, you see the Deshpande Center and the Trust Center. Those are two different programs, one to enable faculty entrepreneurship, the other one enables student entrepreneurship. If you look at VMS, you saw Bose earlier, so the former president and CEO of Bose Corporation runs a program called the Venture Mentoring Service, or VMS, and that's designed to help mentor young companies. It's all volunteer, it's experienced executives to help companies be successful. And that mentoring model now is actually replicated in about 50 countries around the world. And then so where do we engage internationally? You can see that this is now being replicated all over the world. Japan, France, United Kingdom, Arab Emirates. And I'm going to give you a specific example in Portugal, which we were directly involved with. And this is a comprehensive innovation network. So we took those pillars, brought them into Portugal. The program is about 8 years old now. And you can see that it's all over the country of Portugal, 6 universities, but you have the education, you have the research, you have the academic affiliates, and you have industry involved. And if you look at the ecosystem that's been created, you can see, again, the education and training ecosystem in terms of the faculty is there. On the far right bottom, you'll see the Innovation Entrepreneurship Program. There's a venture competition that's been created that gives €1 million in prizes. And that is supported by Portugal's largest bank called Caixa Capital. And that program has generated 60 new startups. Those startups have raised over €27 million outside of the program funding, and they have created well over 350 jobs. And now it's in its 5th edition. And of course, industries are heavily engaged. And this is ongoing in Portugal. So the next step, of course, is a relationship we have with a newly formed venture capital fund. It's an $800 million fund, or 600 million euros. I guess that's less now because the euros has gone down. But at the time I used to say 120. I have to recalculate what that is. And so again, you quickly look at the inefficiencies in the ecosystem. So we quickly know, let me just go back. So first of all, you have to stimulate deal flow because it's new. So you have to work with universities, work with incubators on deal flow, and to package deal flow in an appropriate way that it can be analyzed by reviewers. Secondly, then you have to use a whole network of entrepreneurs and advisors to review the deal flow. And then you set up outbound hubs. So there's a hub that is located in San Francisco and Boston. There's one in Berlin. And there's one going to be in Shanghai. There's sort of an affiliate operation in London. And that's because Portugal is a small country, and you have to look at a global market. And then finally is attracting capital. So there's an angel network incentive program that's created as well. So if, I talked about Mexico earlier, I didn't want to leave Harvard out of the equation because Harvard is very strong also in Cambridge. And Harvard, again, same type of program. They have an Harvard iLab. Some significant companies such as Facebook and Staples have been created there as well. So let me just go quickly through some of the things that are key in the ecosystem. So first, federal funding. NIH funding, you can see again, Massachusetts is #1 per capita. 8 out of the top 14 NIH-funded institutions come from Massachusetts. That's very significant. Patents issued per capita, second only to San Jose. And this creates patents, and intellectual property creates products. Then you have 5.5% of the global pipeline, 11% of the US pipeline. But what's significant, you're hitting unmet medical needs such as neuroscience, oncology, you're hitting cardiovascular disease, anti-infectives. It's important to be relevant. It's important to hit the needs that the patients have where you're solving unmet medical needs. And there's the ecosystem of Boston. You have investors, you have publications, you have trade associations, you have service providers, you have corporate R&D labs, and we talked about the educational institutions. And this is what it looks like. So all these institutions exist. They didn't exist 15 years ago, and you can make those institutions exist here as well. And then if you look at the impact in terms of economic development, you'll see that some of the major pharma are here, from Genzyme to AbbVie to Pfizer. As I mentioned, 15, the top 20 are present. Same thing in medical device as well. You see some of the big players, and you can see it's also a major contributor to economic development in terms of total workers and jobs, 21,000 workers, 80,000 jobs. And liquidity, so investors care about liquidity. So the fact that there's been a tremendous amount of liquidity in IPOs, that's a good thing because investors can actually partake in this ecosystem as well. And there are incentives put in there, whether they're capital gains incentives, credits for angels to get involved. So this doesn't happen by accident. Those policies matter. And if you look at the investment in biotech companies, this is a record number in 2014 where there was $1.8 billion invested, and that's by far the largest anywhere in the world. And then if you look at the seed capital, there's a lot of complaints there's never seed capital. We don't get, all the seed capital we need, but I think it's growing, and I think it's the case for most places in the world. And those are some of the IPOs. So quickly, just want to go through the pillars. First, you analyze the vision or what you want to be like. Secondly, ascertain the core competence. Thirdly, attract the ecosystem with incentives. Every single actor in the ecosystem must have an incentive that's important. And the advising and mentoring, acknowledging best practices, and also sharing with experienced alumni and experienced executives. So as I mentioned, K-Teams is something in Boston that looks at bringing all this crystallized to a small group of international companies. And the program is designed to help companies finance, sell, manage, and connect, as well as explore the ecosystem. And as I mentioned, it's a turnkey program. It's been incubated at MIT. It is now a private effort, so we were able to successfully spin it out. And now it's going to be offered more broadly, other than just institutions that are contracted with MIT. And so again, I put there the key pillars, and I think that's going to wrap my comments, other than the fact that I think advocacy is important. So it's important that we have both the Biotech Council and the Mass Medical Council, and they spend a lot of time at the federal and state level advocating around the regulatory side, advocating around state legislation, and any key areas of reimbursement and things to do with patient advocacy and so forth. So that concludes my remarks. And I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon, and I hope that I didn't go too fast, but I try to cover a lot to give you a flavor of what goes on in a hub that I think you can emulate. A population of Massachusetts is not too much bigger. It's about 6.4 million. So I think you can probably do this as good as we can. So good luck.